You're here because you want to get smart, fast on what's new and interesting, right? Maybe you're even tracking the big releases in gaming. Well, good news, we've just plunged into a fresh analysis from Forbes. Senior contributor Paul Tassi dropped his early impressions of Assassin's Creed Shadows. That was March 27th, 2025, and we're pulling out the crucial insights for you right now.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding the initial buzz around this, well, seriously anticipated game, especially when you factor in the massive legacy of the Assassin's Creed series. What are the essential things you need to know about Shadows based on these first looks? Let's get into it.
So, to set the stage a bit, you probably have your own history with Assassin's Creed. I know I certainly do. I was completely hooked by Black Flag, lost countless hours in Odyssey. But if I'm being totally honest, the sheer scope of something like Valhalla, it started to feel a bit overwhelming, like just how much bigger could these worlds possibly get?
That's a feeling I think resonates with a lot of players, yeah. As franchises evolve, there's this sweet spot between giving us more of what we love and maybe risking fatigue with just endless content.
Yeah.
So given that potential weariness, that feeling about the series scale, what was your gut reaction hearing about Shadows? Right, that's where things got interesting for me. Despite that Valhalla fatigue, my first take on Shadows, based on Tassie's piece, has been surprisingly positive. The core concept, a full-blown Assassin's Creed game set in feudal Japan, letting you play as both a ninja and a samurai. I mean, that's something fans have dreamed about for, like, over 15 years, and Tassie just comes right out and says it works extremely well. That immediately made me sit up and pay attention. The 15 years of anticipation. That's a heavy weight for any game to bear. So the fact that the initial implementation seems to be landing well is definitely encouraging news for you if you're a fan or just someone waiting for this setting. What aspects of the early game experience, according to the article, really grabbed you?
Well, Tassie mentions sinking around 35 hours into the game already, which, tells you something about its depth. But what's really striking is that the whole Assassins versus Templars storyline, the backbone of so many previous games, apparently barely features in those initial hours, maybe 15 minutes total. Instead, the focus is clearly on embodying a ninja and a samurai within what he describes as a surprisingly poignant and compelling story in its own right. That's a pretty significant shift in priorities early on, wouldn't you say?
It certainly suggests a deliberate choice, maybe focus more on character-driven narratives within the historical context first, before bringing in the larger overarching conflict of the series. For you as a player, that can mean a more intimate, perhaps more emotionally engaging introduction to this particular installment. Which brings us to the dual protagonists, Naoe and Yasuke. You mentioned some initial reservations about this dual perspective. What were your concerns there?
Yeah, the dual protagonist thing, it's a bit of a well-worn trope in the series, right? And sometimes it can feel like you're just getting two thinly veiled versions of the same gameplay, or maybe the storylines don't quite gel. And then you have Yasuke, who, as Tassie points out, feels like a genuinely odd puzzle piece in an Assassin's Creed game. I mean, the series has traditionally leaned so heavily into stealth and hidden blades.
Yeah.
A black samurai in feudal Japan, definitely not your typical Assassin's Creed protagonist.
Precisely. Yasuke's historical presence is fascinating, and for you, the listener, his inclusion presents a really interesting lens through which to experience feudal Japan within the Assassin's Creed universe. The article highlights some pretty significant differences in how Naoe and Yasuke play. What stood out to you there in terms of gameplay?
Oh, the contrast sounds like night and day. Neo is described as the classic nimble assassin we're familiar with. She's all about agile movement across rooftops, stealthy takedowns, pickpocketing, those satisfying single-target assassinations. Then you got Yasuke. He sounds like he plays in a completely different genre sometimes. Tassie vividly describes him practically crashing through the front gate of a castle and murdering 36 enemies to reach his objective. Brutal. He's focused on direct combat, visceral finishing moves, and get this, apparently he has this hilarious ragdoll straight kick that sends enemies flying, really emphasizes the force.
That's a fantastic image. For you as a player, the idea of such a stark contrast immediately raises questions about level design, doesn't it? No areas clearly favor one over the other. And Nao's not entirely passive either, right? There was mention of a chain for yanking enemies, suggests a more active strategic approach for her too.
Exactly. And Tassie even notes that playing as Yasuke can sometimes feel like, well, easy mode compared to the more strategic challenge of Nao's stealth. He actually says switching to Nao often feels like a needed challenge after playing as the more powerful Yasuke. That inherent difference. It could be a really clever way to keep gameplay fresh, encourage you to master both characters.
It sounds like the developers made a real deliberate effort to make sure Nayo and Yasuke offer genuinely distinct experiences, not just different skins on the same mechanics. And this duality seems to extend beyond just gameplay, right? To the visual and atmospheric elements, too. What impressions did you get of the game's presentation?
He calls the game flat out beautiful and immediately makes a direct comparison to Ghost of Tsushima, which he has previously called his game of the year. That's incredibly high praise. He specifically highlights the dynamic seasonal and weather systems. Think vibrant spring blossoms, rich autumn colors, snow, mixed with dynamic winds and intense rainstorms. He even mentions the immersive detail of feeling the rain patter on the PlayStation DualSense controller. That level of sensory detail sounds fantastic for pulling you into the world.
Yeah, that visual and environmental dynamism can really deepen your connection as a player. The Tsushima comparison sets a high benchmark for aesthetics, and those sensory details, they enhance the immersion for you. Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the narrative and characters. The article seemed particularly enthusiastic here.
Absolutely. Tassie describes the story as excellent so far. He emphasizes this fantastic narrative contrast between Neo, clearly driven by revenge after her father's death, and Yasuke, who's portrayed as more composed, more measured, except as he jokes, when he's in the middle of a fight. But what really struck me as significant is how the game addresses Yasuke's unique position in Japanese society.
Yes, the article makes it clear that Yasuke, being a black outsider in feudal Japan, isn't just some superficial detail. The narrative actively engages with his background, making his story, in Tassie's words, unique and compelling.
Mm.
For you as a player, this suggests a potentially very rich and nuanced narrative experience, something maybe beyond the typical historical game tropes.
It really does. Tassie goes so far as to say that Yasuke is instantly elevated to be one of the best black lead protagonists he's ever encountered in gaming. That's a powerful statement. It hints at a thoughtful, respectful portrayal of his character and experiences within that context that could be particularly meaningful for you, the player.
Definitely. A well-developed, respectful portrayal of a historical figure from an underrepresented background. They could add significant depth and resonance, offer you a fresh perspective, move beyond conventional storytelling. However, integrating these two very different gameplay styles, while promising, can also present some challenges, right? In terms of game design. The article briefly touched on that.
Exactly. Because Yasuke is designed for that direct, open combat, and Nayu excels in stealth, Tassie raises the potential for area design issues. It makes you wonder, will the environments be designed to truly accommodate both playstyles effectively? Or might you sometimes feel forced into a certain approach depending on the character and the area?
That's a valid point to consider as you hear more. Balancing level design for both stealth and direct combat needs careful planning. Ideally, you'd have multiple pathways, multiple opportunities, but achieving that seamlessly, that's a real challenge for developers. The article also mentions a base building element, and it didn't sound like Cassie had a great experience with it.
No, not at all. It wasn't the concept itself, apparently, but the horrible frame rate he experienced in that specific part of the game. He even says it made him actively want to avoid it, which suggests a pretty significant technical issue, one that could really detract from your overall enjoyment if it's a core part of the loop.
Technical performance is absolutely crucial for immersion, for a smooth experience. A noticeably poor frame rate, even in one section, can be a major source of frustration for you as a player. It's interesting that despite this technical hiccup and the potential level design questions, Tassie's overall impression remains so positive.
That's the key takeaway for me. He's very clear. This isn't a final review, not yet, especially given the sheer size he estimates maybe halfway, maybe a third of the way through after 35 hours. But he stresses that, unlike his experience with Valhalla, he's genuinely excited to keep playing, to explore more. In this case, the game's size feels like a positive, not a detriment, because the fundamental gameplay, the world itself, is just so engaging.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the strength of the core elements in Shadows. If the mechanics, the characters, the narrative are compelling enough to keep a seasoned player engaged for that long and eager for more, it suggests a real achievement, particularly for someone, like you mentioned, who had grown maybe a bit skeptical of the series' direction.
Absolutely. He concludes by offering a strong recommendation, even to those who, like he was, might have become a bit disillusioned with the Assassin's Creed formula. That really underscores the potential of Shadows to perhaps reignite interest in the franchise for you and for other longtime fans, too.
So, to sort of recap our deep dive into Paul Tassie's initial thoughts for you, Assassin's Creed Shadows is making a very strong early impression. largely thanks to its compelling dual protagonists, Nayo and Yasuke, offering distinct gameplay in a rich historical setting. The narrative seems engaging, visuals are impressive, drawing those favorable comparisons, and despite some potential design and technical things to watch, the core gameplay appears genuinely satisfying. It's renewed enthusiasm even in franchise skeptics. And that thoughtful integration of a historical figure like Yasuke, that's a noteworthy, potentially groundbreaking aspect too.
Exactly. And this initial look at shadows kind of leaves us with a thought for you, the listener. Consider how the deliberate inclusion of diverse historical and cultural elements, particularly showcasing underrepresented perspectives like Yasuke's, can enrich your gaming experiences, ways that go beyond just simple entertainment. What other historical settings or less explored viewpoints do you think could lead to equally fascinating, compelling narratives in video games? It's definitely something to think about as you consider what you look for in your gaming experiences.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And as Paul Tassi himself pointed out, he's only scratched the surface after, 35 hours? A significant amount of playtime. We definitely encourage you to keep an eye out for further discussions, more in-depth reviews of Assassin's Creed Shadows, as more players get their hands on the full game. There's undoubtedly much more to discover and evaluate as you form your own opinions.